There's a huge ego component to weddings that I think people don't quite realize or maybe think about. But you really want, like, a bride wants to feel proud of her wedding day. That family that, invested a lot of money into that wedding day wants to feel proud. And how can we design a space that isn't overdone or underdone to where they're going to feel really, really proud of that day, today, tomorrow, and 20 years from now.
Uno, dos, tres. When you're thinking about design and the design elements of a venue, I've seen a lot of venues, and I think maybe even ones that were, a bit older, maybe built on the kind of banquet hall style, where it was all inclusive and it was a little bit more. I don't want to say basic, but kind of had that maybe older, very kind of opulent looking style. When
Right.
you do things in home design, and I'm sure it is the similar way with venues as well, you kind of run this risk of, like, while it may be very trendy or very on style, on brand for that year, couple of years, 5 years, whatever it is, you run this risk of looking outdated. And you mentioned timeless. What do you like to do as far as style goes, so that you give it character, you give a building this relevancy to meet the needs of what couples are looking for now, but not go so far down that road where in 5 years you're gonna have to completely redesign things to be able to address the needs of those couples in that time period?
Right. I'm a huge believer in less is more. I think at times it's easy for architects and designers to get carried away and over design spaces. And I think what we really try to do is keep it simple. We really want to make sure that these are going to be, we think about photography a lot, and what materials are going to be classic and timeless. What materials are going to look great in photos today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What materials are going to be easy to maintain, easy to clean? How do we keep everything looking great, for generations almost? And I guess the biggest thing we do is just really tone everything down so that we're combining the old and the new. My goal would be that you would never see a venue like, oh, yep, that's 2018, or that's this trend. We don't want to ever go too far or over design a space. I think that's also the key to appealing to a wide range. So we want our venues for our clients to appeal to the modern couple, but also the modern couple's parents that are usually involved in the selection process in some way,
Absolutely.
shape, or
And a
form.
lot of times the finance, right?
Exactly. And then what's going to make people feel proud? So there's a huge ego component to weddings that I think people don't quite realize or maybe think about. But you really want, like, a bride wants to feel proud of her wedding day. That family that invested a lot of money into that wedding day wants to feel proud. And how can we design a space that isn't overdone or underdone to where they're going to feel really, really proud of that day, today, tomorrow, and 20 years from now? Versus even my own wedding, I look back at my own wedding pictures and I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? So we don't want anyone to make some choices like that, I guess.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you see any trend towards smaller weddings? I know you said kind of an average size is around 300 people for you guys. Is that kind of a sample size for the venues that you specifically work with from a design perspective that maybe makes sense for your company to work with them? Or do you see any trend towards smaller wedding sizes?
I do see trends in smaller wedding sizes. I don't know if there's definitely a market for smaller venues. Absolutely. But I do think it's important. So many times, you know, if you're going to be opening a venue, it really is a volume-based business in a lot of ways. And depending on what your business model is, but most of our clients are wanting to do, you know, as many weddings as possible. And typically what we see too is as people are touring, people meaning a potential bride, as a potential bride is touring a venue, right after they get engaged, they typically think their guest size is larger than it will actually be.
Okay.
So when you build something too small, you're actually alienating a potential audience. So even if, you know, so like that's where that 300 number comes in, because I think what we've noticed is that for a 300 person venue, you can host a 50 person wedding and it's going to be comfortable and it's going to be fantastic. And there's just so many options that that bride can have in hosting a 50 person event there. You could also host a 300 person event there. On average, our 300 person venues are probably hosting weddings between 150 and like 225. And they might have, you know, a good number of events that are between 50 and 150 and a good number that are 225 to 300. But that's kind of where, you know, the majority of that, those weddings are. But I think it's important as people are touring that they can envision their wedding, no matter what size, in that space. Once you kind of go over that 300 person number, the square footage just becomes so big that anyone who thinks they want a smaller wedding, like 50 people, will walk into that space and like, oh my gosh, it's too big. This is not for me. So you really alienate the 50 person weddings. But I think if you can really create and design the building with square footage in a smart way, you can appeal to all weddings. And then depending on the trend, if trends are going smaller or larger, you're ready and you're able to adapt to those changes.